Today is Thursday, March 28, 1985. This is an interview of Rudy Fabian, who will describe some of his experiences during the Holocaust. Rudy?
I was born in 1922, October 10th, in the city of Khust.
What is spell that?
C-H-U-S-T.
In what country was that?
Czechoslovakia. My mother comes from Khust. My father comes from Mukachevo, Munkach, where we lived. Munkach was a city of a population around 35,000, of which around 20,000 were Jews, and the nickname of it was Klein Yerushalayim. It was an actual, looking back at it, a very fine cultural center. You had all minorities living in peace, and all these minorities had their own schools. We had a Czech school, we had a Hungarian school, there was a German school, there was a Russian school, there was a very well-known yeshiva by the Munkacher Road, and there was also a Hebrew gymnasium. What was a private school? It was a very hard-schooled comparison with some of the schools when I talk to children today, because they were 8 gymnasiums, 8 years that you went in the high school, and if you failed 2 subjects, you repeated the whole year. If you failed 1 subject, they gave you a chance to make up during the summer. You took an exam, and if you failed, you repeated the whole year for 1 subject. At home, we spoke only Yiddish. We started talking Hungarian in 1938 when this part of Czechoslovakia became Hungary. In Czechoslovakia we had a wonderful life, because Czechoslovakia by itself, it was the first president, Naaser, who looked at the United States, and he tried to make Czechoslovakia a miniature United States in Europe. Czechoslovakia by itself, they were 5 separate states with their own capital, but the capital city still was Prague. But these little states had their own little capitals. When we became Hungary, we gradually saw what changes are coming. We had to go in the beginning every Thursday afternoon. I'm talking about the Jews only. And it was more like a farce. We marched through the city, then they took us out on a farm to do some very menial work. The work wasn't hard, but it was degrading. On one occasion, they took us into, there was a big gym that the Czechs built there for the soccer, and they wanted us to clean the floor, and it was a parquet floor, and they gave us toothbrushes to scrub the floor. We had to wear on those occasions just a yellow band for that afternoon. So when we marched through the city, they knew that these were Jewish boys marching.
Who made you do this? How did you come to do this?
The Hungarians.
Which Hungarians? The government itself?
The government, yes. And the Leventes, what was an organization, they were in charge of us.
How do you spell that?
Leventes.
What kind of organization was that?
It was a military organization.
Fascist?
Looking back at it, yes.
Religious?
I couldn't recall what religious they were.
And this was associated with the government in some way?
Definitely. Yes, yeah.
So it was partially a legal instrument?
Oh, definitely a legal instrument. It was approved by the government.
Uh-huh. But there was no law behind this, was there?
Yes, there was a law. You had to go. Otherwise you were put into jail.
What was the law?
The law that you had to go every Thursday afternoon and put on a yellow band and go to work.
This was a law enacted only against the Jews? Only against the Jews.
Just started the minute we became Hungarian.
Uh-huh. Yeah. All right. Rudy, would you tell us, before we go any further, just for the record, your parents' names and whatever brothers and sisters you had?
My father's name was Ilash Aya Farmblum.
Would you spell that, please?
Farbenblum. My mother's maiden name was Jenny, Zeny Engelman, Engelman. And going back, looking back at the city that I'm trying to describe to you, with all these Jews, we still had frictions. The frictions came in that there were so many different organizations. All Zionist groups were represented. We had Mizrahi, we had Shomer HaTzion, we had a Poalei Tzion, we had a Klal Zionist, and we had a Betar. And I, as a youngster, remembering, I belonged to the Betar. In fact, on one occasion, I remember Jabotinsky staying at our house when he came to speak to Munkaj. And we were called fascists because our uniform was a brown shirt with little gold buttons with the menorah.
Okay.
Our uniform was a very nice brown shirt with gold buttons, and the buttons had a little menorah, and we had a cap like Trumpeldor used to wear. And we had white stockings, a little short pants, and I was very proud of it. In fact, I remember on one occasion I went to a Betar summer camp, and there I already, looking back at things, I noticed the militarism of the Betar party because they divided us in two groups. I belonged to the younger group at the time, and they used to call us the Batlanim. But we did very little. We just had a good time. But the older boys who were 16 or 17 or older took part in the military maneuvers with the Czech army in Slovakia, what was in Humene.
In where?
Humene. That's a city in Slovakia. But it was still a very nice, peaceful life under Czechoslovakia because all these parties did exist, but they were still frictions between the rabbi who did not believe in Zionism. And not on one occasion when one speaker or another came in to speak, whether somebody came to speak to the Betar or to the Shomer HaTzion or to the Poalei Tzion, there was frictions between these groups. All this disappeared under the Hungarians because they did not allow anything of that type. In 1942, I went into Hungarian labor camp.
How did that happen?
Well, if you were 20 years old, you had to go into camp.
That had nothing to do with the Nazis, though.
Well, it did and it didn't. We know about the Nazis, but a lot of things that we heard at that time yet, somehow you didn't want to believe that it can happen.
Was the labor camp set up pretty much like the concentration camps, or were you free to come and go? Were there fences and armed guards around? What was the nature of this labor camp?
When I went into the labor camp, we were sent to a city of Sombat.
Will you spell that, please?
SZOMBATHELY. And they put together a group of 100 boys, or 105, I don't recall the exact number, from our area, with a group of Jewish boys in the same age from really Hungary, what we used to call Mamaland, that actually didn't even speak Yiddish, they only spoke Hungarian. And these boys, to my big amazement, were first Hungarian and then Jews. In fact, some of them, when we were taking over the border to Poland, sang the Hungarian anthem, God Bless the Hungarian, what we could not understand. And here where I really learned that in their eyes, not all Jews are equal. When I got into camp, I even learned it more so, that they were classes. That the real Hungarian Jew looked down at the Polish Jew. And when there was any disagreement or something, for him there was no more insulting thing to tell me than call me you Polish, that you are a Polish Jew. In a labor camp, we were first for, give or take, about 3 months in Sombatay, where we did very little work. We were wearing our own clothes. We had a yellow band, and we were wearing a Hungarian army cap, except the army cap, the regular army cap, has the Hungarian colors on a little button on top of its cap. We were not allowed to wear that because we were a disgrace to the Hungarian nation. In the first 3 months, we got up very early. We were each assigned an instrument, whether it was a shovel or a pick or an axe or a saw. And for 3 months, we marched.
In the camp or in the countryside?
In the countryside, in the camp, but it was constant drills.
Were you under?
Right?
Yeah, were you under any armed guard?
Armed guards, constantly.
Constantly?
Constantly.
Were there any escapes?
No.
No.
Not here.
Was there any viciousness, any punishment?
Yeah.
You mean there were beatings?
Not as much as beating on occasional, but punishments came in some of the things that we had to do, like go down bend down and for an hour to be on your knees, or in exercises mainly. And the guards that we had throughout in Hungarian labor camp were the scum of the Hungarian army. Some of the worst people that uneducated bigots that could kick and hit were assigned to these jobs. In fact, I had there one who was a corporal. His name was Winkler.
What was his name?
Winkler.
W-I-N-K-L-E-R?
Right. Whom I taught Hungarian history and geography and a little literature and a little mathematics. So he took later a test. I got him ready for the test to become a sergeant. Yet this man was an absolute sadist. Some of the things that he sort of were just unbelievable. What as punishment, and he had fun. To him, that was fun. And so we came back from a day's work where you really worked hard.
Was this productive work or just work for the sake of keeping you busy?
No, some of it was quite productive because we were shipped out from Sombatay to a place called Uzhok.
How do you spell that? U-Z-O-K. It's on the border between Poland and Czechoslovakia.
Uh-huh. And there it was very cold. We were put into cars, cattle cars, and Sombatay, and we traveled anywhere between, I don't recall the exact time, but I remember it was approximately a week. Cattle cars were never opened.
You were locked up for a whole week?
For a whole week.
Did you have winter clothes?
We had, that time we still had our own clothes, so it wasn't, but it wasn't heated.
What did they do about feeding you?
They just about opened it up once a day, and they gave for so many men a bread and coffee, and then they opened it up again at night. And it was in the middle of the cattle car. There was a bed look you had to make. You made there, and that was it.
What was there in the middle of the car?
Like a barrel where to make.
Uh-huh.
Now, when we arrived, in the middle of the night, we arrived to Uzhok. We didn't know where we are. They just threw out our belonging, and they threw us out of the cars. And we had a little lieutenant who was in charge by the name of Illes.
How do you spell that?
I-L-L-E-S.
Uh-huh.
Who...
Is there a first name?
I don't recall his first name. Who, when we lined up over there, gave us a very interesting speech. And to understand this speech, you have to go in a little bit into Hungarian history. When the Hungarians came down to Europe from Asia, they came down as two tribes, the Finn and the Uhors. The Finns settled up north, the Uhors settled in Middle Europe. And they had the Middle European Tatars had a tribe by a leader by the name of Attila the Hun. Now, according to their history, when Attila died and he was buried, they took a number of, I don't know how many thousands of slaves, and they diverted a certain river, and they buried him with all his glory and his jewels and everything. And then they diverted the river back on this place where he is buried, because they don't know where he is buried even today. And all these slaves, when they came back after this work, they were killed. So they can't tell where Attila is buried. And when we arrived, middle of the night, he went into a speech that we're going to be like Attila's slaves. None of us will be able to tell the enemy what kind of work we're going to do. Now, we were mountains that were, we spoke there to some farmers that since the last World War, since the First World War, never went up there. And we were assigned in the beginning, we had to cut down each 2 men. Here we are talking about people who never did that type of hard physical labor. 40 trees a day.
40 trees a day.
And there were the guards to count that you cut down 40 trees, because they marked them.
How thick were the trees?
Quite thick. 3, 4, 5 feet in diameter, and by hand you had to pull one guy on one side with the saw, one guy on the other side. And the snow, we never realized how high the snow was in some of these places, that in the springtime we lost quite a number of axes, and in the springtime we went back there to look for some of the axes or some of the other instruments that we lost, and the stumps of the trees were over 6 feet high. Then, on occasions, we were lent out. That was absolutely horrible thinking back at it. The German army to clear the roads in Poland. We used to go into Poland. And the snow on these roads, so they can pass, was so high that one man shoveled to the next one who threw off the snow of the road. It was like cutting a tunnel in the snow. At times we couldn't even have water, so all we had to do is take some snow and melt it down so we can have a little water. Now when we used to work for the army, it was 8-hour march to get where we were going, 8-hour works, 8 hours to come back.
No sleeping?
And they gave you 12 hours for sleeping, and then you went again. And after a while, it took its toll. People just collapsed.
Oh, where did you stay? In the bunker?
No, when we were up there, we were in houses that were, the Jews weren't there anymore because it was a border. I don't know where they had them. They were some Jewish homes with no windows and no doors, and that's where we were.
Were they heated?
No.
And what did you have latrines?
Outside. We went in the field.
Out in the field?
Yeah.
And what about food?
Food they gave us in the morning, a cup of coffee, or what they called coffee, and a slice of bread. And they gave us those days, because the bread we used to save already for lunch, they gave you a small piece of bacon or any kind of cold meat, so you can take it along for lunch. And at night they gave you some kind of a warm soup. That was it.
It was hardly enough to keep body and soul together.
No, it was not. And
didn't some of them get sick as a result, or weak?
A lot of them got sick. I saw on one occasion a fellow who was helping out in the kitchen to get away from there. He chopped off his finger just to get him away from there. And things like this were common occurrences for people just to get away from there. At times, some of my stuff in the labor camp were harder than in a concentration camp for some of these atrocities that they did there.
What happened if one of you did not fell 40 trees?
Tough luck, you didn't come down.
What do you mean?
You didn't come down that evening to go to sleep.
You'd have to stay there?
Mm-hmm. You had to cut down 40 trees.
And you had to stay until you cut the 40 trees?
Right. And then the guards used to get mad. Because they wanted to come down. They had to stay there. Mm-hmm. So they used to divide some groups that gathered down by 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, and sometimes some people didn't come back till 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock.
Mm-hmm. Were the people mistreated in addition to that?
Well, mistreated. You lived under very, very poor conditions. You didn't have enough food. You were constantly cold. You didn't have the clothing for it. And when I'm talking cold, I never experienced my feet are frozen, but I still suffer with. And
you didn't have gloves then to work with in the snow?
Well, we had the only gloves that you had is that you brought from home, that were after a while in shreds. And you can't work with gloves. You can't hold on to a saw with gloves. We had to take them off. And there was I don't think there was anybody who was down there who didn't have ear frostbites or nose or any other part of their body.
Was there any attempt at revolt or escape? Any talk of it? Was there any possibility of it?
There was no possibility of it, because you didn't have where to escape or to who to escape. Who? They would turn you in, and they would get a price for it.
You mean the farmers, the peasants?
Whether it's the farmers or the peasants or whoever it was, they were more like bounty hunters.
There was no chance of getting behind the Russian lines?
No, because the Russian lines were too far away at that time, 1942-43.
Were there any killings, wanton killings of Jews at this time where you were?
Not from our group, but we heard about things. In fact, on one occasion, this is not wanton killings, this lieutenant had a...
Which lieutenant was that? Winkler?
No, Illis.
Illis, yeah.
He had a kind of... Winkler was only a sergeant. He was below Winkler. They had kind of an affinity to make us suffer. And just to give you some ideas what they came up on one occasion, this was... Remember it like now? They gave us small pieces of soap. Where they got it, I have no idea. And it had a J in it. And he asked us, he says, do you know what this stands for? We have no idea. It stands for Judah. But this was made out of Jewish people. He took this up, put it in a box, and gave it a Jewish burial. But these people were, I'm trying to explain, say this, to give you an idea of the things after a day's work, when you came home. On one occasion, this Winkler said, I want to see you all in reverse. Now, what meant reverse? You had to take all your clothing, turn it inside out, put it on, the front to the back, the buttons on the back, the right shoe on the left foot, the left shoe on the right foot, your little satchel that you had, instead of wearing it on the back, you have to wear it on the front, taking your instrument. Instead of carrying it in the right hand, you have to carry it in the left hand over your shoulder, and you have to march backward, like in a parade. Or on one other occasion, he says to us, everybody take all you get, whatever you have, and we have to get dressed very fast and everything. Took us out. There were some trees. He says, you are all birds. And we had to climb up the tree and whistle as a bird for hours in the cold. I mean, these things were absolutely dehumanizing. And one of the things that really was one of the shockers, as far as I was concerned, as long as I live, I will remember it. I found on myself a louse. I didn't know what it is. I show it to somebody. I said, what the hell is this? Look what I found on me. Starts laughing. It's a louse. I sat that night and cried as a youngster. Me, alive. And as time went on, it became worse, and you discovered that there were hair lice, and clothes lice, wet lice, and gray lice, and black lice, and so many varieties. I never even knew They existed. And I considered that later realizing a bigger enemy than we had anybody, because if somebody had typhus and it bit you and they were carriers, and a lot of people just later in camp died from these lies.
Typhus.
One thing or another. And as the Russians came closer, they kept us, pulling us back and still working. Now in the mountains there in Uzhak, we were building bunkers for the soldiers. Then we were mining roads, where we were drilling holes under the road, and the Hungarian engineers, sometimes Germans, came and put in mines. They didn't trust us with the mine. And we came back on foot from Uzhok, through the Carpathian Mountains, through Slovakia, through Hungary, into Austria. And it was a march, or you made it or you didn't make it. It wasn't easy because you were on constant move. The food was very poor.
What do you mean constant movement?
Well, they moved you back. You stayed in one place maybe 2 weeks, did a little work, and then they moved you again, and then they moved you again. It was all march.
These marches, how long did they last?
Sometimes 4 days, sometimes 5 days, sometimes a week, because things kept on changing.
How many hours a day were you really on the road?
About 8, 10, 12, depending what destination they assigned. There was no set rule that you're only going to march so much or so much.
Did the guards march along with you, or were they riding?
No, they didn't march along with us. They were on a carriage.
So they had to creep along with you, or
Yeah,
keep up with your pace?
That's right. They were in the back and some in the front. They marched with us. They had to keep up, and sometimes we marched too fast and the kitchen didn't come on time, so we didn't get any food. So it wasn't a constant that you had food.
How many people were in your work group at this time in these marches?
Around 200.
200.
200. By the time we were liberated from this group, and I'm talking already the marches, there were some marches later that were even worse. From the original group, there were only 11 left.
From an original group of about 200? From an original group of about 200, there were only 11 left?
There were only 11.
What happened with the rest of them?
Died.
From what?
Sickness, starvation.
They weren't shot?
Shot.
They were shot.
Yeah. In 1944, we were working in around a little village, Silvash.
What's the name of the village?
Silvash.
Can you spell it?
Yes. Silvas. What was close by the Slovakian city, bigger city of Košice. Now over there, it wasn't that bad because they gave us, some of the soldiers were doing favors for the farmers, so they let us work for the farmers. It was harvest time. And the food wasn't, farmers at least wanted to get their work done, so they supplied the food. But in that period of time, the Hungarian army decided that they had enough of it, and Horthy decided he didn't want to fight anymore. And we were about 100 kilometers from home. And when we heard that, a group of us, by this family, a group of us, 20 boys, we decided we wanted to go home. So we stopped fighting. Fighting is over, we'll go home. At that same time, they were building fortifications around the city of Košice. And they had all kinds of nationalities. And there was a major from Austria, I don't recall his name, who was in charge. German army. And he only spoke German. And he needed somebody who speaks Hungarian and German, Czech, Polish. And somehow he asked for it, and I became his interpreter. On occasions I went out with him. And the reason I'm telling you about it is because when we stopped working, and when Horthy said he had enough, Salash, he took over. Salash, he was a big fascist. And within 24 hours, everything went back to original status. And this little Lieutenant Killis reported that we didn't want to go to work, that we were sabotage, and they locked us in overnight in a big, like a wine cellar, you know how deep it was. And he decided that in the morning he was going to go and hang us. So the book said that sabotage. And in the morning they took us out into an apple orchard. And tied a hand behind us. He's going to hang us. The fortunate thing was that that same day this major was going to an inspection or whatever it was. He came looking for me, he needed me. And when he got there, some of the guards told him what happened. The next thing we are on this hill with the apples, and you see it like a dust coming up the road, and before you know that is a German major. He goes over to this lieutenant and they start arguing. This one don't speak German, this one don't speak Hungarian, so they need me again. And the Hungarian insisted that he's going to hang us because it was sabotage and we didn't want to go to work, and in war of sabotage he has to hang all saboteurs.
Do you know the Hungarian's name?
Illis.
Well, this was still Illis.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And the argument went back and forth, and finally the Hungarian didn't want to give in. So the German said to him, and I was the interpreter. He says, fine, you want to hang him, hang him. I said, when you come down, I'll put you in German court-martial. So I have thank you, and you are not obeying orders. And then, where he backed down a little bit, he says, you want to punish him a different way. And he backed down on that and took us back. He cut our foot to head. And then for, it was 10 days. And we got home from work. He tied our hand in the back and hang us up by our hand. In the first minute or so you just feel that your body will leave your hands. Pain is just excruciating. You faint. They let you down from the rope. with a pail of water to your face and they hang you up again. At times I wish you would have hanged us, but the pain was... You know, it's hard to understand, looking back at things, that one human being can be so insensible to the pain of another human being, standing right in front of it and watching it and laughing at it. As we got closer to the Austrian border, on the road back, we constantly stopped fortifying cities. It was work and march and work and march and work and march. In Sombathay, we were working again, digging bunkers, and it went. We were one day out there, and the Russians came so close that I could see the Russian tanks. And we hid in a bunker, just about half a dozen of us, hoping that the Russians will go over us and then we'll get out. It was a dirt bunker, and then we'll be liberated. And I guess fate wasn't kind to us because they beat back the Russians and the Germans found us at night, and they took us back to our labor group. Quite a number of the boys got killed that day because of the mortal barrages, mortars that went on back and forth between the Hungarians and the Germans against the Russians. 2 boys did escape. What is a really unbelievable story, the way I found out about their escape. One lived in Sombathay, and one lived in a city from close to my hometown, Sirleaf. And they escaped. And this fellow from Sombathay, his father was a big farmer. They had some farm that a Christian was taking care of. And they went over there, and they were there for about 6 weeks. And the Hungarian field police found it. Now the story I'm telling you, one of the boys told me. The 2 boys were taken out to a Jewish cemetery. They made them dig a grave. They couldn't dig too deep because it was very cold and the ground just wouldn't give. And these field police backed up and shot them in the back of the head.
Both of them?
Both of them.
Do you know their names?
One's name was Weiss.
W-E-I-S-S?
Yeah, the other one, I don't recall the name. It's long ago. And the story I'm telling you now, as I told you before, one of them who did survive told me. As the bullet entered, they both fell into the grave. Fortunately, it was very, very cold. and one did get killed, but one, the bullet entered in the back and just grazed his teeth and got out in front of his cheek. And being it was so cold, he didn't bleed to death. The blood gelled. When he awoke, that by that time already we didn't have our civilian clothing because our clothes wasn't shred. So the Hungarians gave us all the army clothes, except we didn't have the belt. We were wearing a yellow star in front and a yellow band. So they knew that we were Jews. And when this fellow woke from this experience, he took off his hat and he threw away his yellow band and pretended to be shell-shocked. The battlefield at the front was pretty close by there, and he walked into an army hospital pretending that he's a wounded soldier, and they took care of him and sent him to a hospital to Budapest, except on one occasion when he was in the hospital in Budapest. One of the nurses noticed that he was circumcised, and in those days only Jews were circumcised. They found out that he is Jewish, and they sent him back to camp, and that's where I met him, and he told me this story.
Is this fellow the Weiss, fellow's name Weiss?
Mm-hmm.
You know his first name?
I don't recall it.
Is he still alive?
I don't know. That I couldn't tell you.
Uh-huh.
I don't think so.
Yeah. All right.
But things that went on in camp, or in this labor camp. Now, when we went over the border in Austria, we were handed over to the TOD organization.
TOD?
Yeah.
That's the Gestapo.
Well, they had black uniforms. Remember that, and they had on the sleeve they had a skeleton head of a that TOD organization, and we were building tank traps and bunkers where we for miles dug out the grave and made a straight wall. So it was very poorly conceived, because later we found out that one tank went in and the rest just went over. You know. From there, as the front again kept on going, we went through Austria and we went to Linz, Melk, and happened to be in Wiener Neustadt, where again we went out from this camp after the bombings to clear the roads and straighten out whatever could be straightened out there. And that's where the first time I ran into other war prisoners. But as the Russians came closer, the Americans and some Canadians were evacuated, and I snuck into their camp, and the treatment that they had compared to us was like heaven to us, like a palace. Same thing with the food. I mean, there was no comparison. We were what you would call the low man on the totem pole as a Jew when it came to, they didn't care how many people died. There was just, so some more died, some more died. Now in Austria, and we were in Wiener Neustadt. On one occasion there was a bombing, and in this camp was situated, on one side it had a factory, I recall, on one side there was a railroad station, on one side there was a bridge. We were smack in the middle. Whether they did it purposely so for the Allies not to bomb there, but on one occasion they bombed, and we were in a bunker. We had a bunker there for Americans, not for us, and we went into some of their bunkers and they left. But one direct hit fell in, and I don't know how many Jewish boys just got killed instantly. And the thing was so hard, we were maybe 100 yards or so away from it, that when that bomb hit, it was like the air disappeared, and the pressure was unbelievable that we felt, and for weeks after it, I had like a high-pitched hum in my ears, in my head. Weeks, I don't know how long it went on. It was kind of like constantly. Now, as we went there too, they took us from one camp to another. Some of the villages even was there, you know, they made us march through people that were there with sticks, and they just kept on hitting us because we were Jewish.
So this business about they didn't know what was happening is not true.
Only people who didn't know, who didn't want to know. Because I ran into some Germans after the war and spoke with them. Oh, I didn't know.
There's no way they could not know.
There is no way. If you really, you know, you didn't want to talk about it, you were afraid of it, yes. But you didn't know, I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. Because in my hometown, going back, I heard about something that I had murder in my heart at 45. I had a gun and today I would have found that one person. I consider myself a very mild-mannered thing. I would have killed that person. And I'm talking about, I wasn't home on it that time. When they took the people from the ghetto to the railroad, my mother and my father and my grandmother were in the same marching. And my grandmother would have been in her 60s. She couldn't march so fast. So my father tried to help her up. And my mother was on the other side trying to help her. My sister was there, who was 11 years old. And there was a policeman who lived 2 houses down from our house, whom we knew quite well. And she, from what I understand, but he told me the story, she must have said something to the police, have pity or something on the old person, and he beat up on my mother. I would have found that man at 45, I don't care where. I went looking for him, I couldn't find him.
You remember his name?
No, I don't remember his name. And I could recognize him even today, if I could see him. As he looked to me then.
Yeah. Did you have any brothers and sisters?
I had a sister, and she got killed in Auschwitz with my mother. My father died in another camp. Somebody told me just before I came to the States of starvation. And I personally I developed a kind of a guilt feeling that I sometimes, disturbed me quite a lot. Why did I survive? Where my mother, especially my father, were much better people than I was. By better I mean that my mother, her life was nothing but charities. I remember as a child she was involved. In Europe there was no middle class, or you had it or you didn't have it. And we had a business where we had in a number of cities stores. My father was an export-import business. He had a maid at home. And my mother used to go mornings to the school. I'm talking Hebrew gymnasium, because they were kids in this school who didn't have breakfast. So at 10 o'clock, she was there every morning. There was a group of women that she was involved with, and they used to boil up milk, and these poor kids used to come down and give them a roll and a glass of milk. Winter time, she was involved with the joint that used to send clothing from the States.
The Joint Distribution Committee?
The Joint Distribution Committee. She was a member of it, yes. And these women knew the families who needed the clothing. But here again, we Jews live with pride, and we couldn't embarrass the people. So I remember as a child, more than one occasion, where I used to put these packages on a sled, go in the winter at night to these people's door, leave a package on the door, take away the sled, and my mother ran away. Then I used to knock at the door and run. They shouldn't see who brought them the package, not to embarrass them. And more than one occasion I heard from my father, who was involved in business, making a living, that shine rule, I want half of your mitzvahs. And he meant it, because she neglected the business. Those years, the business language was German. In fact, as a child, I remember we had what you would call here a nanny, so I should learn German. And all the correspondence to Italy or Spain or to the States or to Norway and wherever we got merchandise used to be in German. And it sometimes makes you think what makes one survive and one not survive.
Yeah. Hold it, Rudy.
All right.
This ends this side. Yeah, Rudy, do you still have this feeling of guilt?
Yes.
I guess there's no way of rationalizing your way out of it, is there?
I tell you something, Mike. I cannot accept Job's interpretation that the parents ate sour grapes and the acid will settle on the children's teeth. It's very hard to accept it. And I grew up in a very orthodox home. And in 1945, when I got out from camp, I completely turned away from religion. I felt I was deserted. I'm more religious today than I was before. I just didn't want to know. In fact, in 1945, when I came home, two of my uncles that came home in my hometown, that I was born in Khust, come to the synagogue, was Rosh Hashanah, come to the synagogue. I can find some stupid excuses. I have no hat, I have no clothes, I have no this, I don't. But it was actually an excuse not to go. And they found me some clothes, and I went with them to the synagogue. I felt like a stranger, like somebody who don't belong there, or somebody who was left and deserted. Not as much as for myself, because I survived. But I just felt I felt very hurt that my sister, who was at the time 11 years old, got killed in the gas chamber, and my mother got killed in the gas chamber for no other reason, because she went with her child to protect her child.
What was your sister's name?
Bessie.
You spell that?
B-E-S-I. That's what we call it. Bessel.
Bessel.
Yeah, after my grandmother.
She was 11 years old?
Yeah.
When did they come and take your family away? You were already in the
I was in labor camp, yeah.
So you didn't know that they had been taken away?
No. I was in labor camp.
Mm-hmm.
I was one day home before the Germans came. It was a sheer coincidence. I bribed my guard in Uzhok. I gave him my wristwatch, and he somehow finagled for me a 48-hour pass and a ticket on the railroad. I came home one day, came home like in the evening, and I left the next afternoon, and the following day the Germans came in.
And took your family?
We didn't know about it.
Uh-huh.
I found out about it later, but that was one day before.
How did you get a 2-day pass? Did they give passes to the prisoners at the time?
Not really. I'm still wondering how I got it.
Uh-huh. But you went back?
Oh yeah, there was nowhere to go.
There's nowhere to go?
There's nowhere to go.
Well, what if you had stayed away? What would have happened? Eventually you would have been
where would you have? There was nowhere to stay away. Where?
Were there any partisans in the forest?
There could have been. They never contacted us.
So you had no way of knowing that you would find some kind of haven in the forest?
No. Not them.
Mm-hmm. No. So what happened when you went back?
Well, I went back to labor camp.
Yeah.
Nothing happened. We just read about it a few weeks later that the Jews in that city were collected, put into a ghetto, and then shipped out. But we never had the idea. We didn't know about a crematorium or a gas chamber till later. I didn't know that such a thing existed till I got into Mauthausen.
What year was that?
The end of 44.
The end of 44. And this was going on since early 1942.
Mm-hmm. I came into Mauthausen It was the middle of the night, pitch dark night, and they took us in to this camp. And I was there with an uncle of mine. And we saw there people laying down, and we lay down between these people. Except in the morning when I woke up, these were all dead people. There were thousands of them laid out there.
Thousands?
Thousands. Bodies, one next to the other. And I spoke with somebody there, another prisoner, and I saw there a big chimney. In fact, I thought it was a factory. And I asked him, what is that, a factory that we're going to go to work into? And he said, factory. So, be careful, you shouldn't fly out that way. I still didn't know. When he explained that those are some crematoriums. I was in a camp, Milk. There I saw human bones. Somehow, one reason or another, the small bones, whether they don't burn or whatever it is, but they were piles, mountains of them. Human bones.
Where was this camp, Milk?
Austria.
M-E-L-K?
Yeah.
How did you get to Mauthausen?
As we were marching along, and you know, we did a little work here, and they threw us in here, and they threw us in there, and when we were in Austria, when we were going between these camps towards the end, before we got in, the last camp that I was, where I was liberated, was Gunskirchen. It was one of Gunskirchen.
Can you spell it?
I think it's spelled Gunskirchen. It's on the outskirts of the city of Wells. W-E-L-L-E-S.
Now, when you were marching in Austria, you were still under the Hungarians?
No.
This time you were under the...
Once we got into Germany, we were given over to the TEIOD organization.
Oh, I see, yeah.
And we were under the Germans.
And the Hungarians were completely out of it.
They were out of it.
Yeah. And from there on, you were completely under the Germans.
Right. Like I remember on one occasion, we were going from one camp to the other. I don't remember, exactly which camp it was, but it was in the Austrian mountains. And there was a whole group. They were evacuating a whole camp, not just us. And from far away, you could hear a machine gun going. We didn't know what it was, and it was like a serpentine road. And they set up, you had to march with a machine gun, and they were two youngsters, because the guys in them, those days, they were young kids, 18, 19, or very old men. It wasn't a regular army. And these two young kids set up a machine gun and just indiscriminately were shooting in the people. I don't know how many people they killed. And I was there with two other boys and my uncle, and he says, well, if one of us gets hit bad enough, you just leave him there. Luckily, in our group of 5, we were marching 5 abreast. Even then, you just didn't go one at a time. You had to be a line, like a military outfit. Nobody got hit, but I saw their bodies just thrown left and right, and you just stepped over them and kept on going.
What happened to these bodies?
Nothing.
They were left in the road?
I don't know what happened to them.
You don't know?
When we used to do these marches, especially in Austria, let's say you marched 2 hours, then you sat down for a rest, 20 minutes or so. Because once we were there, it wasn't just our group, young people. There were other groups with us who were men in their 50s, 60s, 40s, from other labor camps, other prisoners. And when you got up and you moved, those people who couldn't get up and march, these young people just went over, took out the gun and just shot them right there and left them dead in the gutter. on the side of the road. It was a test march.
Do you know any of the names of some of these guards?
Yeah.
You don't know the name of the commander of the group? No names.
No.
But these were all Germans.
Yeah. And they were young, youngsters.
Teenagers.
Yeah.
Hard to conceive of such cruelty among such young people.
Yeah. Young people. Young or very old?
Were the old people just as cruel?
Were the old people just as cruel? Some were. On one occasion, one thing, it still amazes me. There was a fellow with me in camp that could have passed for my twin brother. We were came together from the beginning.
Your twin brother?
No, he could have passed for my twin brother. Look, a lot of things like that. And this German comes over to us and says, "Why don't you help that man?" All right, so we took him under the arm and we helped him, elderly man. I don't know his name. A few minutes later, he comes over and brings us a slice of bread and gives me half a slice and gives my friend half a slice for helping this man. Oh, sure we'll help him. Maybe he'll bring us a little more bread. Then in the evening, we stopped in a forest. And this guy again comes. He says, "How's the old man doing?" "Oh, fine." And he's there at the tree, was sitting there. This guy goes over, takes out his gun and shoots him. Just like that.
No reason.
The thing what sometimes in camp that amazed you, that things that did happen, no reason, and you couldn't understand it.
That's the worst part.
Well, my biggest fear all these years in camp was that nobody will survive, that nobody will be able to tell the world some of the absurdity, some of the things that each person that was there could write a bestseller. Because we each have our own story.
Yeah, if anyone would believe it.
I can only bring you to my house and open up the window a little bit and you can peek in. If you were not there, you will never understand the tolerance of a human body, the willpower. Because at times when things were the worst, I said, no, I have to survive for no other reason. Somebody has to tell. Yet, not on one occasion. I was just so down and I said, gee, wouldn't it be nice not to wake up tomorrow morning and just get out of this? Because towards the end, we used to take you out 4 in the morning to count. The count had to be the count. I mean, this military thing about it. And they used to give, sometimes for 10, later it became 12, and for 14 men, 1 little loaf of bread. You didn't give shit. Now, not to be partial, who gets what when we cut it up. We used to try to take it, cut it up 14 different, put it down on a blanket, take a slip of paper, put a name on it, and put it down. Whatever name was next to which piece, so there is no partiality, that piece you took. And we used to switch the blanket each day to somebody else, because the one who gave the blanket was entitled to the few crumbs that were left there. Now the bread by itself was moldy. So what we used to do quite often, take the bread, make crumbs out of it. We used to get there was no water in this camp. We used to bring in water. We used to get only 1 cup of water. So he took the water, poured it over the bread, tried to heat it up. Make like a bread soup, something, to survive.
How did you eat it?
Made a little fire on the side. They caught you, they shot you.
Making a fire?
For making a fire, yeah.
Some of you had matches.
Somebody had, yeah.
They weren't readily available, were they?
No.
So little things like a match was precious.
You never knew what was precious. If I would tell you some of the things, looking back, what meant willpower to live. I was in Austria on this occasion. We were working on these for the thought organization. And we were in an age group, that we could produce. On one Sunday, they let us go home early. It was around 2 o'clock. Springtime. And we were at that time living in a mill that was on the river, makes flour. And I go down to the river, something I wanted to wash or clean, and I see bubbles coming up. I see there is fish here. Always loved to fish. I had no equipment. How can I catch fish? I had a pin. I bent it, sharpened it. I unraveled my socks, the cotton, made myself a fishing line. In the back, Smell had a little garden where they grew string beans. String beans grew on a pole. Took one of those, was in business. Guy who lived there, who took care of the things, had a couple of cows, so there was some manure. I started digging in the manure and found a few worms. And I went and I caught about 4 or 5. Most of the fish I lost because there was no shank on the hook, and as I hooked them, I lost them. So then I learned when I hooked them, I had to yank them right out. And in the evening, I made a deal with another guy, one who had an onion and one who had salt. And we cooked the fish. We had fish. On one other occasion, we were working in Hungary yet, and we were working alongside the railroad, building tank traps and bunkers. And we were working right by the railroad as the railroad was going. Now, every few miles, these railroads have a guard to watch the railroad, the crossings. Now, this guy had a few chickens. And these chickens knew already, we come to dig. When we throw out the dirt, there are worms. And they used to come every day. One day I asked one of the kids that was working with me, who was a farmer, I said, how do you kill a chicken? He said, when are you going to kill a chicken? I said, just tell me how you kill a chicken. I'll get a chicken. He says, you can twist his head off. Okay. And we used to go to work over a cornfield. And occasionally I used to see there little ears of corn that fell down. And on one occasion, when we were going out to work, I found one. Chicken are coming, and I throw a kernel, and the chicken comes closer, and another one closer, and the next one closer. The last one I put down next to me, and the chicken comes. I grab the chicken, and I twist its head, put it under the wing, put it under, and I keep on digging. And the guard is walking there, watching us. I guess I didn't twist enough because the chicken revived. The next thing, my arm started going as the chicken kept on kicking. And the
chicken you kept under your arm, under your shoulder?
Yeah, under my shoulder. I twisted its head, put it under the wing, but it revived.
Yeah.
And it started kicking. And the German nearly shot me. He came over, he said, oh, verfluchte Juden, what you have that? I have nothing. I said, it's a nervous condition. And he took it, and then I reached in when he turned away, and I twisted till that chicken stopped, and that evening we had chicken. But these were the...
How'd you cook the chicken?
Huh?
How'd you cook the chicken?
How did we cook it on a chicken?
Yeah.
Very carefully on a fire. Just straight on the fire. You know, just plugged it in and just burned it on the
fire.
That chicken was mainly raw, but it was chicken.
It was chicken. A little bit of protein.
You know, it was chicken. Because towards the end, our body was so bad that it just opened up and you were rotting away between the bites from the lice, and not enough, you were rotting away alive.
Did you have any reaction to the rich food after suddenly eating a chicken?
I don't recall that I had any, but I know that because a lot of the things those days, you know, that used to drive me, at least me, and I'm sure the other people too, up at 3 years. You go to bed and you hear, when I'm going to get out of camp, my mother is going to cook me this, and my father is going to make me this, and my sister is going to make me this, and my wife is going to make me this. And you go to bed with all these things on your mind. You dream about them, and you wake up in the morning cold, wet, hungry. You know, sometimes people do not understand that sometimes through these things, like I like to stand at the window and watch the rain. I'm dry. I am safe. Because I remember when I went out to work and the rain came and you felt it on your shoulder. Then the water came down under your armpits, down on your body, coming down gradually into your pants, over your leggings, into your shoes. And we used to kibitz about it. The good thing I have a hole in the shoe, so it gets out. I mean, these are, you can go on and go on and go on as you know, of these things. And they try to break your spirit, try to take away that little spark, you know, for life. I saw people who just sat down after a while and said, they just wanted to die.
I believe it.
I never realized how weak I was till I really got into Gunskirchen.
Into where?
Gunskirchen. That's the cave I was liberated in. That 2 blocks from our block, there were a couple of women that I knew from my hometown. Now whether they gave the women more to eat, they were there before I got there. I don't know how long they were there already, but this was a new camp, pretty new. There were no barracks. We slept on the floor. No straw, just on the ground. And they said to me, says, you can come to our barrack and sleep. And if there is a little soup left, we'll save you the soup. I said, oh, sure. For food, anything. And I went over there, and I swept up, and the straw maybe could have been 10 pounds, maybe. I doubt it, with the dirt. And I put it in my blanket to lift. I couldn't lift it. I had to drag it on the floor. I did not have the strength to lift that thing. It really shocked me. You know, how, I don't know how much longer I would have left. When the American army came in, this is my clothing, they weighed clothing, whatever you had already. I was 90 pounds. I mean, if I looked at my hand, you can see both bones, same thing on my leg. You can count my ribs. It was nothing but a...
Yeah, what camp was that?
Gunskirchen.
How do you spell that?
I gave it to you before.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
All right. Now, how did you get out of Mauthausen?
On these death marches. As they were coming closer, they pulled us out.
Oh. Well, I was told that the life expectancy of a Jew in Mauthausen was 24 hours. I'm surprised that they let you out.
Yeah. Well, the only reason that they let us out because the Russians were coming closer.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want the Russians to capture us.
They had Russian prisoners at Mauthausen.
They had Russian, they had Poles, they had so many different things of prisoners, you know.
So they evacuated the whole camp?
Yeah, they were evacuating most of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know.
Were any of the Germans captured? Any of the Mauthausen guards captured? You don't know.
I don't know. I wasn't there when they were liberated.
Do you remember the names of any of the guards who were with you?
No.
No.
The only one that to know the prisoners. Who dared to speak to a guard? Who dared to speak to a guard?
Hmm.
When we came into Mauthausen in the middle of the night, being I spoke German, so some guy said to me, so why don't you ask him where we are? And I asked him, and he hit me with his butt of his rifle that he opened up my head. It was bleeding awfully. You didn't speak to a guard. How dare you speak to a guard?
So how long were you in Mauthausen?
Maybe a week. I don't, time today, looking back, but it wasn't that long that I do remember.
Uh-huh. What did you do when you were in Mauthausen?
Nothing.
Just sat there?
Just sat there.
Were you in a bunker?
No.
Out in the field?
Out on the land there between the... As I told you, I lay down between the dead people.
Yeah. Was that near the cliff?
There was there, I saw there like a quarry or something, but I didn't know what it was.
Uh-huh.
Not at the time. No.
Uh-huh. They had their own little games there. There was a big stairway or an uneven stairway leading down to the bottom of the quarry, and the prisoners had to run up with a piece of marble on their shoulders, run up, and then they drove down and run up again.
Okay.
They had nice little games to play there.
They all had games, Marty. I mean, looking back at things, I sometimes sit here and I say, how did I survive? I saw so many people, and as I mentioned to you before, that every person that did survive has the same story, except with different characters in it. But it's a miracle that anybody survived after all those things.
Yeah, so they took you on another forced march from Mauthausen to the final camp where you were liberated.
Yeah, liberated May 4th, 1945.
What were the circumstances of your liberation? What happened?
Some of them are very funny. Some of them are very sad. Some of the things we didn't know about it, that it's that close. This is another thing. You never know how long this thing will last. Whether it's a day, or 2 days, or a week, or how long this thing will go. Just on one occasion, it was a late afternoon. There was no guards.
You didn't see them leave?
We did not see them leave. There was just no guards. And that was it. But even then, when you were liberated, it was your mind of all these years was so trained that you didn't know what to do.
You had to have orders.
You had to wait somebody to tell you, now, what shall we do next? Shall we go home? Shall we wait? Shall we go here? Your At least mine, and I assure you that other people have the same thing. Well, in the back of your mind, you wanted to go home. You wanted to see who survived. But it was very, the experience that your willpower, your mind, we used to, already in labor camp and even in concentration camp, we had mind games just to keep your mind active. We used to invent certain games. It's like charades that they have today on television, describing this, describing that, what am I doing, or this, or that. But it was nothing more to keep your mind active. Because
Well, what were some of the details of your liberation? The Americans just walked in and you were free?
The Americans came in, there was no guards, and one of the funniest things in my life happened right there at Liberation. I knew where the kitchen was because on occasions this friend of mine and me, we were chosen to go down for our group for the soup. And even here I will point out to you something. This used to be like a big army pot, but it was covered. So the two of us, with the guard, we used to go and come back. We devised a scheme where we shook it a little bit. Now when in a soup the fat settles on top, and when it spilled over and through the cracks it came out, it gelled. And we used to take it over with the fingers and have a little fat from the soup, a little nourishment, because otherwise it was nothing but potato peels and God knows a few bones of it.
Mm-hmm.
So when we were liberated, this friend of mine all of a sudden comes in with a bread, a whole bread. Gives me a third of a bread, a big piece. I ask him, he says, Shani, where did you get the bread? He says, somebody at the kitchen. Everybody is going to the kitchen for food. So I say to my uncle, I says, Morris, let me go. Now those days, whether you went to steal or something, I'm going to organize. I'm going to get something. And I'm going to organize. He says, be careful. Something can... Let me go. So I went down to the place. And on the front end of it, there are thousands of people trying to get in. Now, I knew this is a very long building, so I went around through the back. And I started figuring, well, I remember this must be the storeroom. And I broke a window and I climbed in from the back of the building. Now, we didn't have a knife. We had a spoon. But the handle of the spoon, we sharpened it so sharp that we could kill somebody. It was like an edge of a knife. And I'm going feeling there's no electricity, it's in the dark. And I find some bags with potatoes. My God, on potatoes, I can live for weeks. And I collected these potatoes, I put them in my pocket, and I put them in, and I get to the window, I have too many potatoes on me to be able to get through the window. It was just too much. So I go back, let me see if I can find something else. And I go around in the dark, and I found sugar beets. Who wants potatoes when I can have something sweet? Sugar beets, I can live for weeks. I go back to the window to get out and I hear some voices, so I better wait to go out. I go back, again in the dark, go to a different direction, and I find some bags, and I take my spoon, I cut it off with sugar. I didn't see sugar in years. I started eating it. I filled up my pockets. I tied my shirt up here. I took off my socks, filled that up with sugar. I tied on my pants on the bottom. till my pants up with sugar. And I get to the window and I climb out. My downfall was that in my cap I had sugar too. And as I'm going, somebody said, "What you got there?" "Nothing, nothing." "What you got there?" "I got sugar."
Mm-hmm.
He let out a scream, "This guy has sugar." And I am running. And I don't know how many people are chasing me through the forest because we were set in a forest. Finally they caught me. I am ticklish, Mari. It is about, I don't know how many hands grabbing all over your body. They ripped off my shirt. They took my cap. They took my jacket. By the time I get done, I get half my pants. Now, I had in the same leggings before potatoes that were wet. Now, with all them jumping all over me, this thing hardened up. It became like a cast. I get back to my group where I was, and my uncle takes one look at me, bloody, dirty as can be. "What the hell happened to you?" So I tell him. He says to me, "Told you," gives me an argument. I said, "Wait, I have sugar in my leg." My friend and my uncle got him under my arm and they put me on a blanket and they start actually, shaking me like this. So they got all the sugar out. We put the sugar together and we traded part of the sugar for 2 breads. We put the 2 breads in a knapsack. My uncle's head went over it, was on it, mine and my friend's Shani. During this night, somebody slid that bag open and stole our bread.
This is, had been liberated by this time, no?
Yeah.
So didn't the Americans give you food?
It was very disorganized.
Uh-huh.
It was very disorganized. There was no food. Because, tell you another story that happened the next day. This group that we were together, about 11 or 12, somewhere around that count that I told you that survived, we tried to stick together. We decided we're going to walk home. Now, we walked into a camp that was a camp that they must have American or Canadian prisoners. Because as I told you that these camps was one for an American or a Canadian, a different for a Polish, a different for this, and we were on the bottom of the barrel. So we went into this camp and we found there some food and lodging. So we said, gee, it's springtime, let's clean up a little bit. And we found in the basement overalls, brand new overalls, and concentrate of tomatoes and all. And the guys say to me, says, you speak English? I mean, I took up English in the Hebrew gymnasium. Why don't you go out and organize? Put on the overalls, go out on the road, and an American Jeep comes. So I stop him. And I tell him, he was quite surprised that I spoke English. I tell him that we were a group of people who got out of camp. And would he mind taking me somewhere where I can get some food? And as we are riding in the Jeep, I noticed a farm there. I says, how about over there? He says, okay. Now this poor farmer, he saw us coming, an American soldier with a gun. he just closed the windows on the inside, the shutters, he didn't want to know what's going on. Now next to this house there was a little house with chickens. And we went into that place and killed a few chickens. Later I found out that these chickens, because they each had a name, that these were some very high-priced chickens. I collected some eggs in my pockets. But the thing here too, to show you how weak I was, there was a turkey. Now I didn't know, today I know it's a turkey. I say to the soldier, I said, I want that big chicken too. He started laughing. He said, that's not a big chicken, that's a turkey. So I go over to the turkey, try to catch it, corner it. And this bird went with his wings, I went flying to the other corner. Well, finally he helped me and we put it in the bag and we went back to camp. And there was one fellow who was the cook before. He says he was going to take care of everything. He cooked it. And we were sitting outside waiting for him to finish the meal. And then he calls out, come on in. And we sit down to eat. And I take a little of the soup. It burns. I said, listen, you, what the hell did you use so much salt? I can't eat that. And I went out and I threw up. It was such a, I said, well, maybe I'm not used to eat. Then I'm sitting outside and furious with him. In a few minutes, another one comes out and throws up, and another one, and another one, and another one. We all got sick, and I mean sick. So again, they turned to me, go get a doctor. So I get out on the road, and the American army is going up and down with trucks, and I see on the side there was a jeep, and there are soldiers going over and kissing somebody's hand, calling him father. So I got in line, and he looks at me because I didn't wear an American uniform, and he says, "You speak English? Where did you learn?" I says, I need help, and I tell him about the boys that we got out of camp and we are very sick and we need help. And he got on the walkie-talkie. And within half an hour there was an ambulance there. And they had to pump everybody's stomach. This cook, there was washing powder. He thought it's baking soda. He used washing powder to cook the chicken. Nearly poisoned us all. And we all ended up in the hospital. We got out from the hospital, so they were trying to put in all the people in a school. To try to, whether this one wants to go here, But after that, I got very sick. I came down with typhus, malnutrition. And they put us into the school. They made this school into a hospital. And I don't remember how long I was there, but I do remember that in the beginning you had such bad diarrhea and you were so that again you couldn't even make it to go out to the bathroom. There was a pot in the middle of the floor, and if somebody died, they just put them in a sheet and they just took them out. And I don't know how many even died there. A lot of people died after liberation, where their stomach wasn't used to the food or whatever it happened. It was bad.
Mm-hmm. And you say you mentioned your uncle several times. He was with you all the way through?
No, he was in a different labor group. I met him with in one of the camps.
What was his name?
Morris.
And second name?
Fabian.
Same thing.
Right.
Is he still alive?
No, he died already here. He came out to this country. He died here. I had other uncles that I met and never made it. On my mother's side, that I ran into them in different labor groups.
Any of your family survived and are alive today?
I have a cousin.
Where?
Texas. Same age and I am. My mother's sister's daughter.
What's her name?
She's married. She goes under the name of Pickup. Blanche Pickup.
T-I-C-K-E-R?
No, P-I-C-K-E-L.
Uh-huh. Where does she live?
In Texas.
In Texas?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. So what happened after your liberation? You were sick and then you recovered, obviously.
Well, I did recover, but I don't remember it because those days when you had such high fever.
You were in an army hospital?
No, they made a hospital out of a school.
Uh-huh.
And they kept us there. And after it, I went to, from there I remember going to Bratislava, where I stayed a few days. And I went to Budapest, stayed there a few days. From Budapest I went home, hoping that somebody might come home.
Well, how did you live?
How did we
You
live?
didn't have money, did you? How did you travel?
No, you traveled? No ticket. You were from concentration camp, you had a piece of paper and travel was free.
Uh-huh.
Or you had to have this paper. And in each city, by that time, there was organizations and they gave you money.
What organization?
Joint.
Joint Distribution Committee was there?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And they gave you money?
They gave you some money.
Yeah.
Enough to survive.
Uh-huh.
I'm not talking about tremendous amounts, but...
were the DP camps open by then?
Not in those areas, no.
Not in that area?
No.
Uh-huh.
The DP camps, they opened later up in Germany.
Yeah.
Because you had a lot of people that they didn't go home because the same thing that was me. It became Russian. I didn't want to live there.
Uh-huh.
The Russians took it, even though Czechoslovakia was on the winning side. This part by the Carpathian Mountains became Russia.
Uh-huh. What happened when you went home finally?
I went home. It was I wish I would have never gone home. Maybe I would have remembered my city as it was. As I passed by my school, there were horses in there. There were rations in there. I came home to my home where we lived. Now, our house was a very nice house by the river. And we had a big iron gate around it. And I knocked at the gate, and the Russian comes out. He says to me, "Что хочешь? What do you want?" And I tell him, "Товарищ, я хозяй, I am the owner," and I tell him the whole story. And he looks at me, he says to me, "Подожди," and I saw this went in for the key. And he comes back with a little machine gun over his hand, pointing at me. He says, "I'm going to count till 10, and then we're going to see who is the owner of this house." I didn't wait till 3. I was never able to get into my own home. So I made up my mind to leave.
You never went back there?
Never.
What happened to, well, now it's still part of Russia, isn't it?
Right.
So you can't go back and claim it now.
No.
Uh-huh. And at that point you decided to come to the States?
No, I decided to go to Prague. I figured that I will go to schools, finish my studies. I wanted to be a doctor. But that fell through too because the communists were there. And I saw what was going on. It's a long story by itself. So I went to register to came to the States.
How'd you get to the States?
I had an uncle that sent me some papers. He paid for the
There?
fare, but it's somebody else who sent me the papers.
Who was this uncle?
It's my father's brother.
And
He came out in 1920.
his name?
His name was Bernard.
Bernard. And he lived here in the States?
Yeah, he lived in New York.
And he brought you to New York?
Yeah.
You could have gone to Hayas or to the Joint, and they would have helped you get here.
Well, I was one of the first ones to come out. I don't think they were yet in, because my visa number was number 4.
4?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, you were one of the first.
And the passport that I had, this is what I'm trying to tell, why they had to open some of these DP camps. I have a Czech passport that it says nationality. It says so far not determined. It cost me a lot of money to get it, just to be able to get out. And usually when you get a passport, it says to this and this country, to go here and to return, the return is crossed out.
Where did you get the money?
I borrowed it. It cost me 10,000 crowns to bribe somebody to get a passport.
Really? Yeah. And you were able to borrow that for something?
It happened to be that a friend of mine from the United States came to Europe for some business. And he loaned me the money.
So you came here and began a new life.
I knew it.
Mm-hmm. Now looking back on it, it was one long nightmare.
Still is, because I still have nightmares. On occasion when Helen will wake me up.
Really?
Yeah, not as frequent as I used to have them, but they are still there. Sometimes I wake up and even in my dreams I don't understand what am I doing there.
Well, of course.
You know, it's a different ballgame, but the nightmares still keep on.
Do you think it could ever happen here?
Yep, definitely. We are tolerated. We are not loved. We have people like you saw today.
Yeah. Do you see any solution to the problem? Do you see any way out of it?
No.
You don't see any end to it?
No. As long as there will be Jews, there will be Jew haters.
And as long as there will be Christians and Muslims, there will be Jews.
I had to laugh this morning when Fabian said that he doesn't hate all Semites. He says he doesn't hate the Arabs.
Yeah. All right, Rudy, we had quite a discussion here. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Oh, I could add and add and add. I'm tired.
You're tired, yeah.
It's 2 hours.
2 hours. Okay, so we'll wrap this up then, huh, Rudy? And if you're in the mood, some other time we'll tape some more.
All right.
For the record, the person interviewed is Rudy Fabian, Fabian. He lives at 3495 Park Avenue, Fairfield, Fairfield, Connecticut. Zip code is 06432. The interviewer's name is Murray, M-U-R-R-A-Y, Kass, K-A-S-S, with the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. My address is 417 B for Boy, Heritage Village, Heritage, Southbury, Southbury, Connecticut, 06488.